Europe is the continent that has owned almost the entirety of the world. Consequently, it's the epicenter of influencing modern reforms and policies. Today, I'll delve into the modern relations between the countries belonging to this continent. Hey, Slavic Vikings, and welcome to the first episode of a new series called Geopolitics of the World. I'll make a video on the geopolitical relationship status of countries in a chosen continent. Today, I chose Europe, because it is where I have lived my entire life, and contrary to my name, Polish Dane, I identify first as a European. If you want more videos from this series, consider subscribing and liking. There are a lot of countries in Europe and an infinitely complex amount of disputes and nuance between them. So I'm sorry if I missed or misrepresented something about your nation, and make sure to leave a comment correcting. I'll try to respond to insightful ones. So first up, the Nordics, the region in which I was born. Known for being peaceful and prosperous, it has had the least amount of wars or instability in recent times. Therefore, as expected, these countries have peaceful or neutral relations with most of the world, except Russia. All of these countries have bad relations with Russia. Denmark, being the earliest enemy of Russia during the Cold War, was one of the earliest members of NATO and geopolitically was competing against the USSR. Moreover, this country was and is a vital strategic ally because of its control of the Baltic Sea. The Danish realm consists of Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. I have friends from all these countries because the Faroe Islands and Greenland are highly integrated with Denmark proper. Although the Kalmar Union under the control of Denmark once consisted of way more countries. Denmark is still one of the last democracies that still firmly holds on to its colonial possessions. However, the colonies have a lot of autonomy nowadays. Denmark has excellent relations with Norway and Sweden, sharing similar cultures and histories. Once part of the Kingdom of Denmark, Iceland is also close to them, Iceland also being part of NATO. Denmark and Sweden were the first to recognize Finland's independence in 1918 and have had close relations since, with the new threat of Russia and application of Finland and Sweden into NATO being undergone. The relations between the Nordics have never been stronger. Denmark has good relations with most EU countries, although not being a fan of Poland's and Hungary's recent shenanigans. Denmark has sent a lot of help to Ukraine and has been an open enemy of the modern Russian state. After all the oil embargoes on Europe, Norway seems to be a more and more critical part of Europe's geopolitical battle, since Norway is a significant oil producer and recently announced that it wants to expand its energy industry in the near future. Norway is not a member state of the European Union. However, it is associated with the European Union through its membership in the European Economic Area. Although Norway still has good relations with Western Europe, especially Denmark and Sweden. Sweden and Norway were in a personal union only 120 years ago, and I would say they are the closest Nordic countries. Sweden is also economically the largest. Having won the global culture war, many Swedish brands are known worldwide. Sweden also has the highest population of the Nordics, and already being a member of the EU, is currently trying to join NATO to counter Russian aggression in Ukraine. Another country trying to join NATO for the same reasons is Finland. Finland is known for not only being neutral, but being able to enforce its neutrality by having a vast network of bunkers and an armed population, with a famously efficient army. Finland joining NATO is a significant tactical failure for Russia, since Finland holds a very strategically important border with Russia. As a member of the EU, it has good relations with other member states and has more culturally close ties with Sweden and Estonia. Iceland's closest relations are with the Nordic states, the European Union and the United States. However, Iceland is not a member of the EU since it doesn't want to share its fishing industry. Iceland has been a member of the United Nations since 1946 and has been in NATO since 1949. Iceland is an interesting instance of NATO since it doesn't have a standing army, but since its location between the US and Europe is so strategic, it doesn't need to fulfill the 2% required budget for an army. However, in recent years, UK-Ireland relations have been troublesome because of a series of cod wars. These wars were fought because of territorial fishing rights and didn't actually see any sea battles. Instead, Iceland just threatened to leave NATO and the US told the UK to chill. Speaking of the British, their geopolitics have changed a lot recently, since they left the EU. Once a vital part of the European community, now the UK holds almost no influence in European affairs, instead being dominated by Germany and France. The UK is going through an economic crisis after the two Lizzies died or resigned. This led to an unstable trust in governance and Scottish support for independence rising. The UK is the second country we have covered so far that still remains part of an old colonial empire. Other than direct British territories, it has allies because of its past expansions. For this reason, the UK is very close with Commonwealth members and the US. How can I talk about the UK without mentioning Ireland, another country I've lived in? This EU member now shares a border with a non-Schengen area country, which has caused a lot of drama since both countries don't know what to agree on. Its membership in the European Union influences the foreign relations in Ireland. However, bilateral relations with the United States and the United Kingdom are also crucial to the state. It is one of the groups of smaller nations in the EU and has traditionally followed a non-aligned foreign policy, even not joining the Second World War. Speaking of the Second World War, let's move on to Germany. Once a brutal dictatorship controlling all of Europe, now a beacon of democracy. However, not all in Germany may agree with this statement, since recently the German police stopped a far-right monarchist coup. Germany is by far the wealthiest and most powerful country in the EU, also having the most influence. Often smaller European countries will follow new policies introduced in Germany. Germany is a founding member of NATO and the coal and steel community, which was the prerequisite to the EU. Germany managed to humiliate itself at the start of the war in Ukraine by not showing full support to Ukraine by only sending helmets to the war zone. Germany and Russia have had a very complicated relationship in the past few years. For example, Germany has been closing its nuclear power and creating more gas and oil connections to the Russians through Nord Stream 2 pipeline. However, it seems like Russia has crossed the line and any corrupt politicians who support Berlin-Kremlin cooperation have lost all public support. Relations between Poland have gone down since the new Law and Order Party mentioned in the previous video won, since it keeps demanding war reparations for World War II. Germany probably has the best relations with Austria because of its shared language and culture. In Austria, they speak the same language of German, and both of these countries were united once because of Anschluss, but now are united by both being in the EU. Although Austria is not in NATO, since after World War II, Stalin agreed to withdraw troops from Austria as long as it promised to stay neutral forever. However, Austria broke this neutrality for the first time recently by supporting Ukraine. Switzerland, which is even more neutral than Austria, is not officially in any union and has recently also broken neutrality by sending $100 million worth of aid to Ukraine. In between these two countries is a micro-country called Liechtenstein. This country has an international dispute with the Czech Republic and Slovakia concerning the estates of its princely family in those countries. After World War II, Czechoslovakia, as it then was called, acted to seize what it considered to be German possessions. Speaking of another micronation, Luxembourg. The biggest of the bunch is also somewhat close with Germany and France, but nothing compares to the love it shares towards Belgium and the Netherlands. The Benelux is a politico-economic union comprising these three countries. These countries share similar cultures and histories and are closely intertwined, with the workers in these countries choosing to work in the Benelux region. Belgium has a highly divided population. Flanders and Wallonia are the main regions where people speak Flemish and French, respectively. The biggest partner of the Benelux is the Netherlands, Similarly to Norway, it has recently grown in geopolitical influence since this country has a high potential for oil and gas production. However, it has been trying to close the excavation because it was causing earthquakes in the region. France is an important ally and founding member of the European Union and NATO, therefore having favorable relations with its members. Although during recent times, France has been seen investing a lot in its relations with Mediterranean countries like Croatia, Italy, and Greece, wanting to create a sort of Mediterranean coalition with its own influences. This is a pattern with all major regional powers. They all want to create their sort of factions so they can influence minor countries. France also has a very vast foothold in Africa, especially in the north and west, because of the smart way they managed to do their decolonialism, by in practice keeping a lot of power in the newly formed countries by locking their currencies to the French. Therefore, France gets a lot of workers from former colonies that still speak French. When it comes to Germany, the two are definitely close but still fiercely competing for influence. France has one micro-country inside it, that being Monaco. Monaco is a tax haven with minimal geopolitical influence. France is the biggest trading partner of Spain, and they both have had good relations in recent years. Though they do not agree on much in modern history, Spain is another aligned Western nation that has historically been politically unstable but nowadays is reasonably united, with some significant independence movements. Spain has maintained its special relationship with its fellow Spanish-speaking countries. Its policy emphasizes the concept of an Ibero-American community, essentially the renewal of the historically liberal idea of Hispano-Americanismo. Spain also managed to have a good relationship with all its neighbors. Spain has a dispute with the UK because of Gibraltar. Speaking of a neighbor you might not have noticed, Andorra. Created as a buffer, Andorra nowadays is very closely integrated with Spain, and to a less extent, France. Portugal is the last country on the Iberian Peninsula. After a humiliating defeat in the recent match against Morocco, you might think that Portugal is a weak and small nation, but that's not true. Other than being a member of NATO and the EU, it has influence all over the world, the most known being Brazil. These two countries have a love-hate relationship, and many Brazilians go to work in Portugal and vice versa. I have a friend from Mozambique, a Portuguese colony, so he can speak Portuguese. You can see Portuguese colonialism cultural impact in Angola, Guinea, East Timor, and many places in India. I experienced this firsthand when visiting Goa in India, where Portuguese influence is evident. Italy, another power in southern Europe, has recently changed its politics, finding inspiration from its past by focusing more on nationalism and, in general, being more geopolitically isolated. Italy, of course, still part of the EU and NATO, holds its allegiances to the West. Italy is a vital ally to the Americans, since if you have Italy on your side, you have secured the control over the Mediterranean, which is a critical sea when it comes to global trade. The Vatican, as the smallest country in the world, may seem to have little to no geopolitical impact, but this is not true. The Catholic Church is the biggest branch of Christianity, and Christianity is the most popular religion in the world. This means that the Pope has very much influence, and leaders worldwide know this and try to get on the good side of the Pope. For example, Pope Francis has called on the Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the spiral of violence and death over the war in Ukraine. Hence, the Vatican isn't afraid to assert geopolitical power. The last two microstates, San Marino and Monaco, located in Italy and France, respectively, function as tax havens and have little to none geopolitical impact. Now, Greece and Turkey, the two countries that always get along. Greece's most considerable modern dispute lies primarily with its hatred towards Turkey. The clearest example of this is Turkey disputing their national maritime territories, since Greece has a lot of control over waters close to Turkey's mainland because of its many small islands. A modern but resolved dispute was between Greece and North Macedonia. North Macedonia was once called Macedonia, and Greece would not accept this name since Greece says it inherited the Macedonian Empire. This was resolved in 2019 with the changed name, and relations are now way better. Moving on to its biggest rival, Turkey, or now Turkiye, has had a complicated and unstable modern geopolitical history. Turkey currently has the most refugees in the world, with 3.7 million people coming from Syria during the ongoing civil war. I have a friend that's a first-generation refugee from Syria, and she can see the significant impact it is having in this country. The current leader, Erdogan, has been invading Syria with the goal of creating a safe zone to displace Syrian refugees. Since the foundation of this republic from the Ottoman Empire, Turkey has tried to integrate more into Western Europe, mostly with the reforms of Ataturk. The Kurds are the biggest ethnic group in the world without a country. Most of these people live in eastern Turkey and are a big part of Turkey's modern politics. For example, when recently Sweden and Finland wanted to join NATO, since this requires approval for all members, Turkey said that Sweden has to return dozens of people that he suspects either of involvement in a failed 2016 coup or membership in a banned Kurdish militia. During the first stages of the invasion, Turkey acted as a neutral negotiator between Ukraine and Russia. Although, when things started to escalate, Turkey is now leaning more towards the West. I will go deeper into Turkish-Middle Eastern relations in a video about Asia, but we have to move on for now. Moving on to Eastern Europe. We start from the north, the Baltic states, an often forgotten group sometimes confused with the Balkans. There has been two big news when it comes to Lithuanian geopolitics recently. The first was Belarus trying to force Iranian refugees into the Schengen area through Lithuania and Poland, which obviously caused a lot of tension between Lithuania and Belarus. The second controversy was with a less expected nation, China. Which China, you may ask? Well, both. According to the mainland's China, One China policy, countries may only recognize Taiwan as West Taipei. Well, in a Lithuanian representative office, Lithuania used the word Taiwanese instead. This caused China to get very irritated and in practice embargoed Lithuania by claiming lack of documentation was the reason for its trade blockade. Only about 1% of Lithuanian exports go to China, which is exactly why they could afford to make such a diplomatically risky move. However, it caused some tensions between the more prominent EU members like France and Germany, since they didn't want to sour relations with their significant trading partner. Other than that, Lithuania is close to the EU and very close with Poland and other Baltic states. Lithuania was the first to state that it would defend Poland unconditionally after the Ukrainian missile, mistaken for Russian, hit Polish soil. Its neighbor to the north also stands firmly with Ukraine, although it suffers to a greater extent because of it. 1/4 of the Latvian population identifies as Russians, and it is heavily dependent on Russia for food and energy. This means that the new sanctions have heavily impacted the Latvian economy. Therefore, Latvia is holding on to safety by standing strong with the US and its allies. Just like Latvia, Estonia is suffering from the same problem of sanctions having a big impact on the Estonian economy. Estonia is culturally very close to Finland, liking to align itself culturally with the Nordics. The idea of forming an Estonian-Finnish federation has been discussed several times in history but has never been achieved. And there are many real discussions of connecting the two nations with an underwater tunnel. Estonia's biggest rival is obviously Russia, but just like its Baltic brothers, it's because of historical oppression. Speaking of, now Russia. Russia has recently invaded Ukraine with the help of the two breakaway states of Donetsk and Luhansk. These states are barely recognized and have controlled the region for a while now, only recognized by other breakaway states, Russia, Syria, and North Korea. These countries are also the ones that support Russia the most. with North Korea and Syria being major suppliers of drones and other weapons. The Belarus government is very close with Russia, with Lukashenko even negotiating a form of union with Russia like in the good old days of the USSR. After the invasion, Russia has been openly against most major powers around the world, with China being the only one to be somewhat neutral. Russia has terrible relations with Finland, the Baltic states, all other Slavic countries except Serbia, and Caucasus countries like Georgia, because of recent invasions or oppression. Russia is part of CTSO. The Collective Security Treaty Organization is an intergovernment military alliance in Eurasia consisting of 6 post-Soviet states: Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. Russia is also a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, which is an Eurasian political, economic, international security and defense organization. It is the world's largest regional organization in terms of geographic score and population, covering approximately 60% of the area of Eurasia, 40% of the world's population, and more than 30% of the global GDP. Russia's greatest opponent is obviously Ukraine, with them having an ongoing war. Ukraine has excellent relations with NATO members and the West because of their aligned enemy of Russia. All of Russia's close allies, therefore, are Ukraine's enemies. That also being Belarus. The people of Belarus and Ukraine have a similar history and culture, and both don't support Russian expansionism. They just have very opposing governments. So when I speak to Belarusians and Ukrainians, they always support each other. It's just the Belarusian government of Lukashenko is a self-proclaimed pro-Russian dictatorship. Poland is one of Belarus's biggest enemies, with Belarus creating huge disruptions in stability of the EU by forcing immigrants, mostly from Iraq, onto the border with Poland. Poland's number one enemy is Russia, and in a way always has been, with its foreign policy primary focus being to stop Russian influence. Other than that, Polish relations are close with its fellow NATO and EU members. However, Poland and Germany have had recent clashes over World War II reparations. Poland is especially close with Hungary because of similar historical struggles. Both share a similarly authoritarian government and hold each other's backs when it comes to voting in EU politics. Czechia, like Poland, is part of the Western organizations and has few geopolitical enemies. However, it has the earlier mentioned dispute with Liechtenstein. Since Slovakia was once in a union with Czechia, it has the same disputes as Czechia. Slovakia has a dispute with Hungary over dams built when both countries were communist. These dams were finished on Slovakia's side, but were never finished on Hungary's side. Nowadays, this still creates problems diplomatically. Romania is also a member of NATO, and the second poorest member of the EU. Romania is a beacon for stability in the region, with unstable former Yugoslav nations to the west and a dangerous geopolitical situation to the east. Moldova is an ethnically Romanian state that has a really unstable situation because of Stalin's border painting. After World War II, Ukraine got northern parts of Romania and all of Moldova's coastline as a gift from Stalin, and in return acquired a majority Russian ethnic region of Transnistria. This was a genius play by Stalin, since it forced influence of Moscow onto Moldova, because they no longer had access to prosperous seaports and now had a volatile Russian majority region. This region is now de facto independent from Moldova, and it is the only country in the world not to abandon the Soviet way of life. Moldova cannot unite with Romania until the Transnistrians are dealt with, and I don't see that happening in the near future. Hungary historically used to claim and own the Romanian region of Transylvania, but with both countries being in the EU, these claims have been dropped. Hungary's leader Viktor Orban has been a pain in the ass for the EU, with him being strong allies with Putin and only recently clearly condemning Russian aggression. Hungary often has tensions with Romania, Slovakia and Ukraine because of their significant Hungarian minorities. Bulgaria is the last easy country on this list before I reach the complicated mess of the former Yugoslav countries. Just like the formerly mentioned countries, Bulgaria has a communist past and has a deeper connection with former communist countries, even more so than with its fellow members of NATO and the EU. Bulgaria is planning to close many embassies around the world that they consider useless. The relations of former Yugoslav countries are complicated, but I will try to explain them as briefly as possible. So first we got Serbia. Outside of the Balkans, Serbia is known to have very close relations with Russia, with Serbia not wanting to implement sanctions on Russia even after mass atrocities undergone by the Russian army. Other than that, Serbia is not part of the EU or NATO, with NATO recently bombing Serbia. Even with the recent Yugoslav wars, Serbia still has okay relations with Slovenia and good relations with North Macedonia and Montenegro. The reason for this is them separating without conflict from the former country of Yugoslavia, where Serbia was the dominating power in the federation after the death of Tito. However, Bosnia and Herzegovina have very tense relations because of the large ethnic Serbian minority and Serbia wanting to unite that population into Greater Serbia. The most gruesome war was against Bosnia, in which Croatia fought fiercely on the side of the Bosnians, which resulted in modern bad relations between Serbia and Croatia as well. Kosovo is a partially recognized state, de facto independent since 2008, with 117 countries recognizing it. It has awful relations with Serbia since the entire state of Kosovo is in Serbia, with Serbia claiming it is just a rebellious province. This country has a very high Albanian population, with 93% being Albanian. After its independence, there have been ideas to unite the two countries of Kosovo and Albania into Greater Albania. Slovenia is a member of the EU and NATO and is the most liberal and western of the Yugoslav countries. Slovenia's modern geopolitical focus is integration with the EU. Similarly, Croatian goals in foreign policy nowadays are getting closer to the EU institutions and being a stable member of NATO. Since the signing of the Dayton Agreement in 1995, things have been stable for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia is a potential candidate for membership in the EU. Montenegro really wants to join the EU, with that being one of their main political goals. Montenegro even uses the euro without the EU's permission. North Macedonia just wants to be left alone and somehow is friends with everyone in this highly confrontational region in Europe. Albania is an interesting case since its foreign policy is specifically set to be as good as possible with everyone, despite its flag looking so scary. Even having good relations with former historical enemies like Italy, Greece, and Turkey. Moving on to the only two small island nations in Europe, Cyprus and Malta. De facto, Cyprus is divided into two states, the north belonging to a Turkish puppet state and the south being independent, with a UN buffer zone separated the two and a couple of British bases sprinkled around. The reason for this mess is the Turkish invasion of 1974. They invaded because a Greek militia junta took control. So modern Cyprus has no diplomatic relations with Turkey and culturally shares much with Greece. Cyprus historically has a non-aligned foreign policy and today is the only EU member that is not part of NATO. Malta, although in close cooperation with NATO members, is part of the modern non-aligned movement. So that was the last country in Europe. I didn't cover the Caucasus countries because it's disputed if they are part of Europe and this video is already way longer than I want it to be. So if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, and if you want more of this series, comment below what continent you want me to cover next. And as always, farewell, żegnam and goodbye.